In January 2004, the news broke that Alan White, Oasis's longest-standing drummer, had been asked to leave Oasis by the other band members. The Sun says Alan left Oasis in 2004 under somewhat mysterious circumstances.
Throughout the whole time, we've lost a drummer, gained a new one. It's been a rough old ride, but we're here now.
A video explaining Alan White's mysterious firing from Oasis has been, year after year, far and away, the most common request I've ever had on this channel. And so, today, at long last, after just countless requests, I've decided to delve into those mysterious circumstances, to put together all the clues that we do have, and see if we can join the dots in any way that kind of makes sense. On the 11th of November 2003, while Alan was still in the band, the NME released this. Oasis are to go into the studio in early 2004 to record with Death in Vegas stars Tim Holmes and Richard Fearless as producers. We would later find out from Alan White's brother Steve that a month and 10 days after the release of that article, Alan White was sacked. Steve said there were some disputes about meetings. I wasn't there, so I couldn't comment. What you would get would be a story from either side. I'm sure they've all got their opinions, and I respect that. The bottom line is that Alan got a call 4 days before Christmas from the manager, and he was told that he was out of the band, and he hasn't seen or heard from Noel or Liam since. All Alan wanted was to have a pint of Stella, and the guys to say, "What we want is to get Zach Starkey in, as we don't think you're right for us anymore." Alan would have had no problem with that, as nothing lasts forever. But it was just the circumstances of the events which were shocking. They shocked me and they hurt Alan. He would love to play again, but I think he was really hurt the way it was done with Oasis. But he wasn't the first musician that it had happened to. But for someone like Liam and Noel, who presents this image, I am tough, I am hard, and I can take on anyone, they couldn't stand there face to face with Alan. I don't like that. So there we have the first piece of the puzzle. We have a specific date for the sacking, December the 21st, 2003. And we also have the first ambiguous little hint at the reason. Disputes about meetings. In Q magazine, August 2005, Liam was asked, "Bonehead, Alan White, Death in Vegas. Does Noel sack your mates?" But Liam then replies, "It was my decision to have a word with Whitey. When you've had 2 years sat on your arse, you should turn up for work. When the bat phone goes, you gotta go." In a 2008 radio interview with Chris Moyles, Noel also seemed to confirm that it was Liam who initiated the sacking.
But now you have a new drummer.
Now I've got a new drummer. In fact, you know
Chris Sharrock.
Yeah,
he's a phenomenal drummer.
I've known Chris for years. When Alan White got the boot by Liam, before Zach joined,
Right.
I actually offered Chris the gig.
And so now we have a very vague picture starting to come into focus, pixel by pixel. In April 2005, Noel answered the Alan White question in a little more detail in an interview with the NME, saying this: "It seemed to me and Liam that his interests were lying elsewhere. For starters, he never came to the studio to do demos. We called this band meeting to decide what to do next with the direction of the album. We've only ever had 4 band meetings in 12 years, so once they're called, they're pretty serious. Andy gets on a plane and flies in from Sweden, knowing that the meeting will take 15 minutes and he's probably not going to say much because I do all the talking. Now, we moved this meeting back 3 or 4 times to accommodate Alan, but he never even phones to say he wasn't coming. Turns out he's hanging out with his bird in Spain. Once the word bird and Spain are mentioned together, it's like, okay, Oasis versus girlfriend." And so the trail of breadcrumbs is emerging about this important band meeting that Alan allegedly missed. But to me at least, it seems there must be way more to it than that. Just simply missing a meeting in and of itself, on its own, seems to be a bit of a cover story, just the tip of the iceberg, to me at least. And what did Liam mean by, when you've had 2 years sat on your arse, you should turn up for work? Had Whitey been doing no work for 2 years? On the 22nd of May 2000, Alan ended up having to pull out of an Oasis gig in Barcelona because he was developing tendonitis and becoming unable to play. He did recover, however, and then they went on to finish the tour. Next came the Tour of Brotherly Love, a tour featuring 3 bands containing 3 sets of brothers who often fought publicly: Oasis, the Black Crowes and Space Hog. And on this tour, Alan didn't play because, presumably, a connected issue was still bothering him. His brother Steve instead filled in for him.
The whole thing's been a real good experience. The New York show, second night at Radio City, was a real fantastic achievement.
Next, however, came the 10 Years of Noise and Confusion tour in the UK, and Alan was back. Alan also played for the Heathen Chemistry tour all the way through 2002 up until March 2003, so he definitely wasn't just doing nothing for 2 years. But there was at least the suggestion that his injury problems were still not resolved, because on the 16th of January 2004, the NME ran this: Alan White is out of Oasis. The future of the drummer has been the subject of intense speculation all week after a tabloid newspaper claimed he was to quit the group because of problems with tendonitis. Alan, however, apparently directly refuted the tendonitis rumours. For his part, White has kept a low profile since his departure, excluding a statement to a drumming site where he said that the tendonitis rumours are utter shit and that the reasons are others. There was actually a fair bit going on for Alan at this time in his personal life as well. He had met American model Liz Carey on the set of the Don't Look Back in Anger video shoot, and they married in 1997. Their divorce apparently happened in 2004, so it's fair to assume that at this point, Christmas 2003, Alan was right in the middle of all that drama, the breakdown of his marriage. And at the time of that missed band meeting when he was in Spain with his girlfriend, according to some sources, the purpose of that holiday was him trying to mend a rift in that relationship as well, so it was all happening at the same time. In an Oasis feature and Noel Gallagher interview in The Big Issue, this was reported. To cap it all, drummer Alan White became the band's latest lineup casualty. Noel won't explain why, simply saying he's a fucking great guy and he's one of the best drummers I've ever met in my life, but his personal life is utter fucking chaos. In the end, he fucked off and we haven't seen him since. So his marriage was ending, and he was out in Spain trying to patch things up with his girlfriend as well. There were also murmurs of musical discontent from both sides. For example, Alan complained that his drums kept getting turned down in the mix, saying, "Well, I don't like that my drums get turned down with each successive mix we do of an album, but one mustn't grumble in this band." Noel has also made some negative comments about Alan White's playing in the studio since, albeit in the context of Be Here Now.
Alan White, you would start a song and it would be one pace. By the time you got to the end of it, it'd be like twice as fast. And that's not acceptable to me, do you know what I mean? And I remember just thinking, fuck this, it's just, we have to scrap in every take, you know, because they were just speeding up too much.
So, did Alan have tendonitis? It certainly was a recurring issue around this time. Did Alan miss an important band meeting? I think it's very possible. But were those things really the reason he was fired from the band by Liam? Personally, I just don't find that convincing. It is just my opinion, but I think there was a fight between Alan and Liam. I think there was a bust-up, after which I think he withdrew socially and decided from this point on, in the band, I'm just a session player. I'm going to show up, play my drums, and then I'm out.
This one from Spectral Night. How easy was it to fire people from the band when you didn't, did you? Well, Whitey, did you fire Whitey?
No. He for the record.
Yeah.
You still miss that boy because he's a good lad.
Great drummer
But
too.
he started to act like a session musician.
Right.
And he something happened between him and Liam. I don't know what, and if it's a case of siding with your brother or siding with the drummer, I'm afraid your brother wins out.
Exactly.
But he kind of didn't turn up for some really important stuff, and it was like, you know what, he doesn't give a shit. So.
Do you still keep in contact with any of the old guys in the band?
Do you know, I've not spoke to Bonehead and Gwiggs since the day that they left, which is
weird. That's so strange.
It is strange. You know, I hold no grudges against any of those cats. You know what I mean?
In this era, he had been kind of Liam's drinking buddy for a while. But in that role, all throughout his time in Oasis, allegedly he had to put up with some pretty intolerable treatment. Ian Robertson told the story of Liam repeatedly threatening and abusing Alan as far back as 1995, and Alan was still there with Liam in 2002 in Munich, when Liam started a massive brawl that got the police called in, during which Alan apparently also sustained a head injury in all the chaos. Right after Liam and Alan had gone on stage and sung drunken karaoke to one of their own songs, there was a fight within the Oasis entourage between two of them, and one of them ended up being shoved into the Italian's table right next to them. I think Liam shoved Alan White into that table and started the fight, because everyone else was sat down. These days, in the 2020s, Liam seems to be a much more calm, mellow, reasonable human being. But back then, this was him right in the epicentre of his evil psycho stage. If Alan did have a bust-up with Liam and decided to kind of withdraw socially from the band, that might make sense of Noel's statement that he just f***ed off and we haven't seen him since. That idea is supported by this from Mojo 2005. In January 2004, drummer Alan White received his P45, the band's backbone since the recording sessions for What's the Story Morning Glory, and once Liam's inseparable drinking buddy. They were like the fucking Cray twins, recalls Noel. White had missed his last band meeting. He just didn't seem to be into it, shrugs the elder Gallagher. Turn up, pick up the money, do one. So, what happened? How in that time did Alan White go from being Liam's closest mate in the band, his drinking buddy, to all of a sudden behaving like nothing more than a studio musician and then getting fired by Liam? His brother Steve said that the spirit of being in a band was kicked out of him, which does support that idea that he just kind of lost heart and decided to walk away. And then, in the end, when he didn't come to that band meeting, from their perspective, that ended up being the last straw. From Alan's perspective, he might have felt it was totally unfair to expect him to cut short his holiday in Spain, where he was trying to repair his relationship, for a 15-minute conversation with the band, to which he probably was not going to be expected to contribute anything. If it turns out I'm on the right tracks, it's interesting to note that Noel had to have a similar kind of sabbatical period for almost exactly parallel reasons a few years earlier. In the year 2000, Noel himself had been dealing with the breakdown of his marriage, and he too had felt he had little choice but to take a step back from the band for a little while, following a massive bust-up with Liam in his evil psycho phase. At the Barcelona gig we mentioned earlier, where Alan's tendonitis had first caused a gig cancellation, backstage there had been a fight between Noel and Liam, in which Liam had questioned the legitimacy of Noel's daughter. Noel said, "He's not a very good drunk. He can go from melancholy to real aggressive violence very, very fucking quickly. There is no grey area of having a laugh. It gets dark." The whole thing about Barcelona was based around a real fucking snidey insult that he said to me in the dressing room, which I still haven't forgiven him for and never fucking will do, and he knows that, and it's never been the same since. As a person, he's not my fucking cup of tea, at all. Half the time, he needs fucking throwing in the Thames. He needs taking down to the South Bank, I'll get his arms, and the rest of England get his legs, and we'll throw him in the Thames, because he can't swim. Even though in later interviews it did seem clear that Liam knew he'd been completely in the wrong in this fallout with Noel, he never apologised. So I think it's a fair assumption that whatever the big fallout was with Alan White, he probably also never apologised for that. And so Noel too had stepped back for a time to get his life and head in order. I suspect that the idea that Alan was trying to do the same thing here and ended up actually getting fired would have been pretty galling, and probably did very little to help any of them part company on friendly or even civil terms. And there is one other rumour that I want to address here that frequently gets mentioned as the real reason Alan White got fired, and that is that it was actually him who was responsible for the leaking of the Heathen Chemistry demos to the press a few years earlier. While that is an often repeated rumour, I've not been able to find any evidence or support for it anywhere beyond the fact that it's just repeated a lot. Personally, I don't think that's true. According to The Sun, Alan was bought out by the band for a pretty decent sum, and I suspect the usual raft of Oasis non-disclosure agreements were also signed at that point to keep the perhaps more unpleasant and unvarnished truth out of the public domain. I think there's a very good chance that the Munich brawl was actually at the heart of the fallout. When you look at the timeline, Alan and Liam were still drinking buddies in December 2002. That's when the brawl happened. And then in December 2003, Alan was fired for treating the band like he was a session player. So in the absence of any other real tangible evidence, that does seem the most likely conclusion. And so, in summary, this is what I think happened. In Munich in December 2002, Alan got caught up in the Munich brawl when Liam Gallagher pushed him into a table of Italians. After all the chaos that followed, I don't think Liam will have apologised, and I think that was the point at which Alan drew the line and said, "I'm not hanging out with you anymore." I then think Alan just withdrew from the band completely for the following year pretty much, not turning up to do anything really other than his drumming. And I think that when it became clear after a year of this that this was the new permanent arrangement, conversations were had and the decision was made to let him go. And I also reckon that there's a good chance that that's why Alan has appeared in so little of the more recent Oasis releases. I wonder if he declined to have his stuff used in those releases because things ended so acrimoniously. I don't know, I just wonder. But if that is the case, that is a massive shame for fans like me who love his playing and historically want to see where he was and what he had to say at the time. In a recent interview for Gibson, Noel Gallagher said there would be an upcoming documentary on the Be Here Now tour. If that happens, that would be amazing. It's one of the key moments in the Oasis story. It's Oasis at their biggest, baddest, loudest and maddest, and I really hope it happens. But I know I'm not alone in really hoping that when that comes out, Alan's in it, that his interviews and his drumming are featured prominently, because he was absolutely central to the band and the sound at that time. I don't think Liam is the same person that he was back then. I think he's changed a lot these days. In 2017, Liam would include Alan as part of what he considered the definitive Oasis lineup. And Whitey also posted a few clips of himself drumming along to old Oasis tracks on his Instagram. So I personally hope that things have thawed a little bit on both sides. Because even if they don't all shake hands and make up, even if Alan was treated unfairly, his contribution was such a massive part of Oasis in their prime that to have him not there in future releases, particularly the Be Here Now tour, it's just going to feel like an entire chunk of the story is missing. Whatever the bad blood that might still exist between them is, for me and I think for most fans, the Oasis story will always be a little bit incomplete if it doesn't also include Oasis's longest serving and best loved drummer, Alan White. A massive thank you to all my supporters on Patreon. If you would be interested in signing up to get access to exclusive bonus content and also to get credited at the end of videos, the link is in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, I'll see you next time.